Welcome to Finding Certainty with your host and U.S. Army veteran, Patrick Laing. Over the next hour, you'll learn from Patrick and his expert guests how to attract more certainty into your business and your life. Now, here is your host, Patrick Laing.
Welcome to our favorite day of the week. Not only is it Friday, thank God it's Friday, but it's also Finding Certainty. I look forward to doing the show each week. I get to have really amazing guests join me here on Voice America. As you may know, if you've followed us in the past, I also do a monologue on the first Friday of each month. I'm working my way through the alphabet this year, from accountability to balance to composure. This month I talked about H is for humility. All of these are characteristics that lead to a life of greater certainty. Each of the guests I have on can help you not only find, but develop, unpack, dissect, and define certainty in your own lives. It's a little different for most of us, although there are consistent patterns when it comes to developing more certainty in our lives and organizations. My guest today is Beejel Parmar. He is the founder of a company by the name of Be Epic Outsourcing. And Beejel, appreciate you being on the call this morning. Looking forward to hearing your story and helping the audience get to know you a little bit.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on the show. I'm looking forward to sharing what little wisdom I have left.
Well, my experience, you have a lot more than a little, but we're excited to hear from you. Beejel and I actually met, even though we're both from Nevada, we're right here in Las Vegas together. We met on the other side of the country at a leadership summit. There's a big CEO summit that's done every year at Liberty University in Lynchburg, Virginia. And there was this gregarious, dynamic Indian fellow from London who was really, really impressive. I mean, I was immediately impressed. A great first impression, Beejel, if I may say so. But he was dynamic. He was outgoing. What he was sharing had, I thought, real value. And so we connected. We got to know each other there and have gotten to be friends since. And I've been wanting to have him on the show for some time. Both of our schedules move at 100 miles an hour. And so we finally connected. So I'm excited to have you here. I think you'll hear this in the show, and correct me if I'm wrong, Beejel, but your schedule is probably, while it's busy, it's less busy, or at least less chaotic than mine, if I had to guess, because of what you do and how you do it. You're learning and helping others to learn from your own life lessons and from your own practices, right? Because, and I'll explain why I'm saying this. Beejel is an expert in automation, in virtual assistants. He works with AI-driven virtual assistants. He works in helping you as a business owner or just as an individual to live in what he calls the genius zone. We're going to get into what that means, but you're an expert at that, Beejel. So I assume you're living and practicing what you preach, which is hopefully giving you more quality of life as well as just quantity. Is that a safe assumption?
Yeah, so this all started when I read the book, The 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss. And there's many takeaways, but the one takeaway that really struck with me is, how do I limit what I really don't want to do to about 4 hours a week, right? It's not about working 4 hours and then taking the rest of the week off. I don't think Tim Ferriss ever worked, less than a full-time gig. But the thing is, I think he limits the things he does not want to be doing. Call that the work stuff, right? To about 4 hours. So the mission here isn't that you just, spend all your time just on vacation or whatever. It's we spend the maximum amount of time. And what you mentioned is what I call the genius zone. The best way we can serve our business, our organization, our nonprofit, whatever it may be. But we got to find a way to be serving that. And we can't serve our business in the best way if our calendar is filled up with busy work.
That's right. Tim Ferriss, in his book, he talks about spending your time doing the things that make you excited. he actually defines happiness as the opposite of boredom, right? Unhappiness is when you are bored, when you're spending time on mundane, activities and so forth. Another book is similar. It shares some additional principles. Is Dan Martell's book, Buy Back Your Time. And he says as a CEO or as an executive, a business owner, you should spend your time on doing those things you're really good at and things that you really enjoy, which echoes Tim Ferriss's concept, right? Would you agree?
Yep. And that's basically the mission. So, we can talk about, delegating work to VAs, and that's all great. And that's the tactical level conversation. But I think there's a high level conversation, which is the philosophy of delegation. How are we going to sometimes shift our mindset around the value of our time? Where does our time go? And why do we allow ourselves to get stuck in the thought process of doing low value work is good for our business? I believe, and I think this is true for myself and why I'm so passionate, that it's probably cost me millions by not understanding this concept much sooner in my entrepreneurial business career.
I would agree. You and me both. It's a challenge for C-suite, for business owners to delegate, and for lots of reasons. I would love to unpack that topic because it's something I'm personally constantly working on. I say this is my favorite day of the week, and it's mostly because of how much I personally learned during these shows. I mean, I've been around the block. I've been in sales for almost 40 years. I've owned 3 different companies over the years. I now own 3 entities. We have affiliates across the country, clients in all 50 states. I mean, I'm not an idiot, right? But I still continue to learn. And these shows, just like this one, are a great place for me to learn new insights. Regardless of if you're learning out in the audience, I know you will, but it's a little bit of I guess self-focused, but I really do enjoy that. So, we always start out by me sharing 2 reasons why I've invited this specific guest. In Beejel's case, first and foremost is he is an expert in this area of improving the way you use your time. It is a mindset. It's more than just practice. It is also mindset. It's how do you view your time and view your role as an individual versus a company, et cetera, et cetera. So that's one of the reasons I invited Beejel on if I wanted him to be on. The second is that he's a great example of an entrepreneur and a business owner who is creating opportunity for others, not just in his own sphere of influence, his customers and his network, but in his own company. He's creating opportunity for his employees and his contractors around the world. And I love that. I love when entrepreneurs are truly making a difference, both with their customers, but also internally for their team. And you're a great example of that, Beejel. I know. Your management style, I think, is a great example of that as well. So,
Appreciate it.
Let's start out by just getting to know you a little bit. Tell us, how'd you grow up, or where'd you grow up, and how did you end up here? I know you've been here in Vegas for about 9 years now. Started your company about 5 years ago. So,
so it's kind of a story, but very one of those classic entrepreneurial stories in many ways. So I from the UK, I'm born and bred in the UK. I graduated in 92 with a degree in aerospace. Wrong time, great industry, but wrong time. So I got into automotive. Several years later, around 97, a year after I got married, I had the opportunity of moving across to the US. So I actually came to the US in November 97. We moved to Chicago. And then 3 years later, I quit that corporate job because my oldest daughter was born. And at the time, I was traveling a lot for my business, for the company I work with. And I wanted to be more at home for my daughter, for my wife. And so I quit that job around about the same time. Our friend said, "Hey, come join me in a recruiting company," that he was moving from Michigan to San Diego. So we packed up, we moved across the country to San Diego. We bought a home there in Carlsbad, about a couple of miles from the beach. We were living the immigrant dream. We worked hard. We had 3 homes at the time, and this was the start of a new chapter in our life. A new baby, a new career, a new entrepreneurial career. A year or so into this relationship, I found out that my partner, my friend, was deceiving us, and basically, as a result, we pretty much lost everything. That was my start of my entrepreneurial. Well, I used to call it the roller coaster years, but now I say that we choose to get on a roller coaster. So that's not a true analogy. I call it the turbulent years, and it went on for several years, and and we kind of, to stay legal in the country, we had to leave the country, reapply for visas, come back. Every time we did that, costing us more money and stuff. So most people buy a house. We basically bought a green card the legal way, but by paying legal fees and lawyer fees and stuff. But that's how much it meant for us to be in this country. My daughters are both American, so we wanted to be in the US for them from the long term. In 2009, I had kind of this low moment in entrepreneurship. No matter what I tried, what I was working on, what I invested in, what workshops I went, whether I walked on fire or walked on glass or ate fire or whatever, I couldn't build. I was not successful in building the multiple businesses I attempted to start. Move forward to about, I think it was August or so, when I picked up this book, The 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss. And in that book, several ahas came to light. One of them is the concept of, are you in your genius zone? Like, as the time you're spending in the business, what you're really good at, what you really enjoy doing. And as I went through this book, I realized that, yes, while I had these inspired ideas to start the business, what really drives a business is the day-to-day Monday. I call it the morbid things, the mundane, overwhelming, the repetitive, the boring.
Right.
I don't want to.
Things we do that we feel like we have to do. We don't really love doing, right?
And then what I realized was that because I didn't want to do them, rather than hiring somebody to do those things, I found, I don't like the business. It's not working out for me, right? And I'd go and find something else. I'd go to another workshop, buy another, shiny dangly object, and start the cycle again. This book showed me, hey, no, to build a business, you need to delegate that stuff to somebody. That introduced me to the world of virtual assistants, to the world of outsourcing. And right after reading that book, around September or so, I started my first VA company with 3 VAs out of the Philippines. Literally weeks later, I happened to be at an event. I met somebody who had a much larger VA business. I started working with that company. I helped grow that company from 100 to 500 VAs. And that kind of took me up to about 2019. And I said, and I kind of started to feel that there had to be a better way than just a classic agency model. So most VA companies have a very high markup fee, 2 to 5 times what they pay the VAs. Oftentimes, at least very short-term, relationships with clients, because they don't want to pay such big inflated prices. VAs want to get paid more. They leave the companies. So I started exploring another way to do this business. And that's when I basically left that company. I started BFing outsourcing. And now it's been 5 years, and we have one of the unique companies where it's a direct pay model where our clients pay the VAs directly. But aside from the model, what I really discovered during this process was this concept of productivity. Are we as business owners producing the desired results in the most time and resource effective way? And in doing so, what is our role as founders, CEOs, whatever we want to label ourselves in that entity, in that company? Because before we can even talk about assigning work to VA, we have to understand what our role is and the art of delegation, which is really what's going to fuel the growth of our business.
Let me interject, if I may. I completely agree with you, and I'm looking forward to you helping us dissect that, right? Before we go there, why do you think it's so hard for business owners and executives, busy executives, to delegate? Because just from a personal standpoint, the more I do it, the more I ask myself, same as I say about my business, I should have done this a long time ago, right? You and I were talking about that before the show, but the more I delegate and do so effectively, the more I think, why did I wait so long? But in your opinion, maybe just for the listener, why is it so hard? And I'll share a couple of thoughts as well.
So I have a saying. I call it the death by 1,000 tasks. So you may have, I think it's a Chinese proverb, or death by 1,000 lashes, right?
Right.
I call it a death by 1,000 tasks. Now, what that means is that sometimes things seem very easy. Well, you know what? It's 2 minutes. Let me just do it. 2 minutes turns into 5 minutes. And we switch between task to task to task. The whole day goes by. And we've done a lot of stuff. We feel busy. We feel kind of drained. But have we really serviced the company well, right? Now, you think it'd be easy to say, oh, I've spent the whole day doing busy work. Let me delegate that out. But because we think...
Yeah, I mean, if I just let me add to that. How often do we say, man, I was busy all day. I didn't get anything done, right? That's how it feels.
Right. And so then you think it'd be an obvious thing. Well, you know, I should delegate that stuff out. But because we feel sometimes it's a matter of cost. We think that, you know, not delegating or not hiring somebody is saving us money. I think the opposite is very true. I think when we don't delegate, we're actually costing the business money, right? Otherwise, it's a sense of security. No one's going to do it as good as me, right?
Right.
So that's another one. And it may be true. Maybe you're so good at what you do that no one is going to do it as good as you. But can you grow a business with that thought process, right? I'll take some kind of very simple example. There's been some amazing chiropractors, but until they grew their practice by bringing in other chiropractors, right? They were not a business. They were basically self-employed, right? Now, is it possible? Is it possible to say that the chiropractor, the original chiropractor, was the best in the world, right? The best. But does it mean he can grow a business? No, it means that he has to hire good chiropractors to come in, and so he can actually build, grow a business, and maybe he can be very selective in what he spends his time on, right? Same way for us entrepreneurs. We may be the best at what we do, but if we're doing everything in the business, you're not growing a business, there. Then it comes
100%.
down to your tactical things, which is some things I hear. I'm so busy, I don't have time to hire a VA. Which is ridiculous, but I hear that all the time, right? They just cannot slow down enough. And the very same people who say that, when I ask them, I'm curious, how many businesses do you run, right? Oh, I've got real estate this, and I've got investing here, and I've got this network marketing company over here, and I've got blah blah blah. And I said, yeah, so I run one business, and there's a couple of different product lines, but that in itself is a full-time job in managing the team to run one. How are we meant to be running multiple businesses? And in a lot of times, none of them making money, right? So that's the other contention, of that statement. And one of the things I'm sure you've heard it, Patrick, is multiple streams of income. I've nothing against multiple streams of income. I think it's genius.
Right.
But a lot of times you can't build those businesses simultaneously. You got to pick one, make it profitable, right? Delegate it out so that people are now running that business for you. Now you can go start another business.
I would agree. They say if you try to do too many things at once, you don't do any of them well. But you hit on a really important point, because if you build it in a gradated scale, like climbing up a ladder, get one working well, and then launch another, and then another. And not only do you have maybe more expertise, you have more understanding, but you probably have the resources to be able to invest in marketing, hire help, et cetera, et cetera. Try to do it all at once is challenging. We started our first company, Certainty Management, and eventually started Certainty Global. We started with one product line. Now we have 21 different channels, 7 different divisions, but we added them each one at a time. So even within our businesses, not starting a whole separate company or entity, but if you're adding product lines, it's also smart to do once you have one working, and then the next one and the next one. And those are creating multiple streams of income for us, as they could for you. It is an important principle. I'm glad you brought that up, Beejel, because I think it's absolutely spot on.
Yeah.
So speaking of delegation, Dan Martell, I'm a big fan of Dan's. His book, as I said, is called Buy Back Your Time. He says that something done by someone else 80% as well as you did it yourself is 100% awesome. I love that quote. Right? And you're right. I mean, it's hard to delegate, and it's hard to give it away because you think I can do this better and I can do it quickly. I'll just do it. Right. But handing that off and empowering someone else to do it on your behalf accomplishes a lot of benefit, but even if it's not quite the way you would have done it, quite as good, as long as it's not critical, it's not going to damage your reputation or hurt the company. There is such freedom in doing that. It's very empowering, right? Very invigorating.
Yeah, so I have and what I call an ideas filter, right? I call it an action filter. We go to workshops, we go to seminars, maybe listening to reading a book or TEDx talk, and someone shares an idea, says, "Oh, I want to do that in my business." The very first question I say, and it's kind of inspired by Buy Back Your Time, but also the who not how concept as well, which is, can this be can I delegate this out? Because I know as an entrepreneur, either I've got too much on my plate already, or I don't want to add anything more to my plate, right? Like, and I want to make sure I preserve my social life, my family life, etc. Right? And so the first question I ask myself before I jump on any idea is, how will I delegate this out? Who on my team is the best person to take this on? Do I have the resource and budget to implement this with people? Right? So that's how I allow ideas or concepts, that I want to add to my company to make its way into the company, project list. If I can't figure it out, like if I can't conceptualize the who not how concept, then it's not the right time for that idea to enter the business.
That's great advice. One principle I've heard that I agree with is to look at how much did you make last year. You could even extrapolate that out to how much do you believe you can make this year, divided by 2,000 hours, and then that gives you an hourly amount, right? That's how much you're worth per hour. That's why I say if you even project what you believe you'll make this year, it's probably a more accurate number. But then you say, if you could hire someone to do this task for less than what that amount is, it's worth considering. Because it's your time. Your time is money, right? Not only is it important that you're doing those things that you're excited about and that you're good at, but what could you be doing if you weren't spending the time on those 2-minute, 3-minute, 5-minute, 10-minute things, like your email, like your calendar, like your, travel plans or whatever the case might be? What could you be spending your time on, and how valuable is that if you could be focused on sales or generating new relationships or whatever the case might be, right? It's a really important question, because it's not just what you're spending your time on and how valuable or invaluable it might be, but what are you missing out on that is so much more valuable? Anything you would add to that?
I used to have a slide in my presentation, which is exactly that calculation, right? And what I found is that people had a really hard time with this exercise. They really struggle with it because it kind of was a reality check for them, right? For some people, that number was not that far off $5 per hour, based on how much money they were making, based on how many hours they were working. It was like, and some people they would never publicly share that number, but they'd message me privately and say, "Hey, well, what if mine not much more than 5?" So then we have a bigger problem to figure
Right.
out than hiring a VA right now, right? But the shocker came for people when they realized how many hours a week they were actually working, and what impact that made on their hourly time value, right? And there's two ways of looking at that number, and I always kind of go back and forth. Is you can look at it from what the business makes, right, which is one way of looking at this number. Oh, my business made 100,000 divided by 2,000. That's going to give you an hourly time value, right? And I think at $1 million, it's around $500 per hour, give or take. Is kind of the number, right?
Right.
Then you also, another way of looking at this, what did you personally make? So most people, based on how their accounting relationship, their individual accounting relationship is with their business entity, because sometimes businesses write off everything, as expenses, blah, blah, blah. But one thing I started to do differently was like, okay, I'm playing a role in my business. The business is expecting me to play that role, and I'm going to be compensated for playing that role. Now, to extrapolate this idea further, at a certain point, you may be replaced as CEO of your business, right? The whole purpose of building a business is you can step away, you have some shares in the business, and somebody else comes in with maybe more skills, more competency to run that business, right? But most entrepreneurs, when they're kind of first step into the business, they amalgamate their identity and their business. They feel that they are the business, right? And I think I did for many years, to be honest with you, Patrick.
I agree.
But when I separate these two, and I say, okay, if the business was holding me accountable for my daily performance, how would it rate me? Now, where this came up was somebody. I was doing a training webinar, and somebody says, "How do I value if my virtual assistant is giving? So how do I measure if my virtual assistant is providing value to my business?" And my response, without one of those things where you say something and then you kind of regret what you just said on a live presentation, which was, "How does your business value you?" Right? How are you being rated? Because the same way your business is rating your value, your performance, to do the same thing for the VA. But the brutal truth of that answer, right? Which is if the business was truly reviewing our performance on a week-to-week basis, the same way if you had a job, you may not be getting 5 out of 5 stars for how you show up, in that business, right?
That's right.
But that shift in perspective, as I started to really understand this and started to ask that question, and it wasn't because I was trying to, rate myself. I was trying to find a way of measuring my team. But so if I'm going to start measuring my team, how am I showing up for my own business? And that's sometimes a very tough conversation to start having with yourselves, right? And it's not easy to separate these two identities, but it's such a powerful way to start showing up for your business, in terms of its accountability is what it is at the end of the day, Patrick.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up, because I talk a lot with my partners and my executives. I've got 2 senior VPs in sales here, kind of my right hand and my left hand. And I talk about how it's a difficult transition going from being a solopreneur to a business with partners and employees. It's different. It's a difficult transition going from a small business to a large business. And one of the most difficult transitions, in my experience, is separating yourself from the business. Because for so long you were the business, right? You were a solopreneur. It was your baby. You made all the decisions, and it is a difficult metamorphosis, right? You have to go through a paradigm shift. You have to separate yourself. You have to step back a little bit from the organization and view it through new eyes. There's a scripture that says we see through a glass darkly, and it talks about how, open your eyes, take the blinders off, and ask hard questions. So we are up against our break. We're going to take a quick break. You can hear from our advertisers. I'm visiting with Beejel Parmar, who's the CEO of BeEpic Outsourcing. When we come back, I'd love to have you define what a virtual assistant is. There may be those out there who don't understand that, some of what they do. And let's keep unpacking this topic, because there are amazing benefits to delegation. I'm learning this. I still struggle with it, but I am learning it. And there are benefits not just to you, but to the company and to your employees, to your staff, to so many others. It is very much a beautiful tapestry of what I call ripple effects when you understand this principle and start to implement it. So don't go away. We'll be right back with Beejel Parmar here on Voice America Business.
Follow Voice America at Facebook.com/Voice America for juicy updates from your favorite radio shows and podcasts.
Certainty Management can help create more certainty in your life with our deep discount health insurance options, even for 1099s, part-time employees, volunteers, and more. Pay less to protect yourself, your loved ones, and your team. Call 888-684-3122 for a free quote today. That's 888-684-3122. Visit us on the web at CertaintyTeam.com. That's Certainty, TEAM, like Mary.com.
Have you become a member yet? Sign up now to become a member of Voice America. It's always free and easy. Plus, you get to take advantage of some great member benefits. Get unlimited access to millions of hours of on-demand content across all of our channels. Keep track of your favorite episodes, shows, and hosts in your own customizable library. Find out what shows you might be interested in based on your favorites. Plus, you get insider access with our newsletter. Membership gives you more. Sign up at voiceamerica.com and click register at the top right.
If you're a nonprofit in need of funding, we can help. Certainty Management is a cost reduction firm that also helps churches, schools, sports teams, and other nonprofits raise unlimited zero-cost funding. Best of all, you don't have to sell anything or ask for donations. Call 888-684-3122 to learn more today. That's 888-684-3122. Visit us on the web at CertaintyTeam.com. That's Certainty, Team, like Mary.com.
When it comes to business, you'll find the experts here. Voice America Business Network. You are listening to Finding Certainty with Patrick Laing. Have a question for Patrick or his guests? Join us on the show at 866-472-5790. That's 866-472-5790. Now, back to the show with Patrick.
Welcome back to Finding Certainty. We're visiting with Beejel Parmar. He is the owner of Be Epic Outsourcing. And I love your name, by the way. You've got B-E-E, which is a takeoff of your name, of course, right? And Epic. And yet your mascot, your theme for the company is developed around the bumblebee, right? And I love that because I'm sure there's some symbolism there. Maybe you can share that with the audience real quick.
There's a lot of symbolism. So this all started around just after my 50th birthday. I picked up a book on business management based on a professor's observation of a beehive. And he took the observed the beehive in terms of communication and structure, reporting, how bees played a different role in the business. And then he developed an entire corporate management system around this concept. So I picked up this book, I went through it, and said, let me start applying this to the world of entrepreneurs. And it works so well. So symbolically, bees have always historically been a symbol of productivity. Honey, it's often known as liquid gold, as a valued currency in many cultures, right? In fact, some of the earliest coins had bees on the coins. So that was kind of the symbolic of helping entrepreneurs be more productive. We always like to say that, bees serve their unique purpose. They serve their hive, their community, and bees serve humanity. So as entrepreneurs, we have to serve our unique purpose. We have to serve our community and, ultimately humanity. But the word epic is an acronym. It means being efficient, which is, people say, Beejel, why do you wear a watch when you have a phone, right? It's like, to me, it's that reminder that time is so precious, right? And there's a Stoic saying that memento mori, which is basically, we're here for such a brief moment in time that we have to use that time as wisely as we can, right? And that goes back to delegation. The P stands for productive, which is, are we producing the right results? Now, that even means when you go on vacation, are we producing the best vacation possible? Are we doing everything we can within our human capacity to produce that result for our family? If we're going out for dinner, for a romantic meal, how are we producing that experience for our partner, for our wife, for our husbands, whatever, right?
I love that. That's great.
Yeah. And then the I and the C, I is about being intentional, right? Are we being intentional about the use of our resources? And C is either completing what we start, because I believe as entrepreneurs, and this is really very reflective for me, Patrick, was oftentimes I'd start something, but I wouldn't complete it. It was a kind of a character trait, right? Different reasons. Sometimes I didn't have the right resource, didn't have the right money, lots of excuses of why we don't complete things, right? Lack of time, I'm not interested anymore. But if we're not going to complete it, they're too busy, we can then close it off. So C stands for completing, either completing or closing down that project for the right reason, right? So Be Epic is in itself, there's a philosophy behind that name. And outsourcing, of course, is, the industry that we are in that, really kind of came to foot 20 years or so, 20 years, 25 years ago.
Right. I love that. Before we move on, I do want to get into defining a VA and talking about how you help business owners. Back to delegation real quick. One of the things I think is really important to understand is the benefit that delegation has, not just for yourself, but for your organization and your team. I was asked to be in a book this last year. I was actually wrote 3 different chapters for 3 different books. One was on vision and visionary CEO. One was on business and culture, and one was called Mission Matters. Well, in the Visionary CEO book, I talked about delegation, and I also spoke a little bit about it in Mission Matters, but I talked about how when you delegate to your team, not only does it free up your time, but I found that actually things get done more quickly and oftentimes even better. They did a better job than I would have done, even though I think I'm so great and think I could have done it better. But it also sends a message to them that you trust them, right? It does extraordinary things toward building a relationship of trust with your colleagues, your subordinates, etc. But would you add to that? What are some of the other benefits, or any other benefits that you've experienced, Beejel, when it comes to delegation and using virtual assistants, freeing up your time in that way?
So the ones you mentioned are the most obvious, right? You delegate the work you don't want to do; it gets done by somebody else. Great. That's typically what delegation is, right? Either you don't have the technical skill set, you don't want to do that work, whatever. But there's another benefit that people are not really as aware of, which is if you are delegating the right things to your team and they're getting things done, there's also kind of a feedback loop to you that you better also be getting things done, because if they're producing the results they're meant to be producing, hitting their KPIs, and you keep showing up as the business owner not doing the things that you're meant to be doing, they're going to see that. Now, because they're going to see that, you inherently step up your game, even though you may not be even aware that's why you stepped up your game. So that's why I say to a lot of entrepreneurs who are starting out, they say, "Oh, when's the right time?" I said, "Yesterday." Here's why. There's going to be an invisible benefit to you when you, even if it's an hour per day, even if you picked one thing that the VA is meant to do, in that 1 hour you spend with the VA, you have a quick 5 to 10 minute meeting, right? And in that meeting, they're going to share what they got done the last 24 hours, what they're going to do next 24 hours, and where they're going to be stuck. But you, as the business owner, have to do the same thing. You got to tell them what you got done, what you're working on, and where you might be stuck. That alone, if the VA did nothing but show up for that meeting 5 to 7 to 10 minutes per day, would transform the behavior, the productivity behavior of, I believe, almost every single entrepreneur. Because all of a sudden, the moment they got to be held accountable on a daily basis, they start changing their behavior naturally, right? I think willpower and personal development are wonderful, but I don't think we don't wake up and walk on fire to get ourselves motivated for the day, right? We have to wake up and do the stuff that we don't want to do, or delegate the stuff we don't want to do. That's going to really make the impact on the business.
That's really interesting. I mentioned the Mission Matters book. It's a book where they focus on CEOs whose companies are making a difference. And they interviewed all these different CEOs. I spoke about accountability. That was my topic in my book. And I talked about, or in my chapter, but I talked about this exact point. I talked about the fact that if we have an accountability loop, I refer to finding an accountability buddy, right? Whether that's an employee, a staff member, a colleague, a partner, someone that is holding you accountable, that in and of itself is going to help you get more done. I'll give you a quick example. I built a company from $3.5 million a year to $20 million a year. And one of the key principles we implemented it's called the 4 disciplines of execution. It's a Stephen Covey principle. Mm-hmm. one of the pieces of that is that you commit to the 1 to 3 things each week that will most move the dial forward, and you commit to it. You announce it to your peers, and then you have to come back and report on whether you did it or not. Well, just knowing that you were going to have to show up and say, sorry, I didn't do it, or yes, I did. It was so effective in helping us move the needle forward and increase our production and so forth. So I completely agree with you, Beejel. I think it's a very important principle. Okay, let's move on before we run out of time. This show goes by really fast. But do you mind just defining, when we say VA or virtual assistant, for those who aren't familiar with that term, what exactly is it? How does it work?
Yeah. So the irony is, I don't like the phrase virtual assistant. It's what the industry uses, but the word virtual, if you actually look at the dictionary definition, it kind of means not real, right?
Right.
So I use the initials VA, but I actually call them vital assistants, because the work they actually do is typically vital to business. May not be the most glamorous or exciting, but it's often the most vital thing that can happen on a day-to-day basis. So what does that mean? It means that these VAs, sometimes, they might, if they're more experienced, they might call them executive assistants. Could be pretty much anywhere in the world, right? And particularly, I like to work in the Philippines. That's where my foundation is. That's where I've been working for since 2009. But VAs can be in many other countries. We have some VAs in South America, in Europe, even in Africa. They're basically a remote team worker. A better word really is a remote team member, right? And they're typically, there are project-based outsourcing, where it could be a website, it could be a logo. That's what most people are more familiar with, that concept of outsourcing a project on Upwork or Fiverr. But I'm looking at integrating long-term team members. What we specialize in is in people's businesses, that day-to-day stuff, right? These are not short-term things. This is basically a relationship for the life of the business. And typically speaking, we have to really dive into a business to understand what are those key roles that a VA, a vital assistant, can play on a day-to-day basis that will move the needle, that will free the owner up from that busy work, so they can spend their time in what we come going back full circle, in their genius zone. Because if the entrepreneur is really, but by being in the genius zone, the concept is that you're providing the most valuable to this entity that we call our business or our career. And that's ultimately the role of the VA. The VA's role is basically to do that work that we're not prepared to do, we're not able to do, we don't have the technical skill to do, so that we can play the most critical role, the most vital role in our business.
I love that. I love your change up of the V word, because it's true. If you can have that help to free you up, or you're able to focus more on those vital areas of your business, the things that you both enjoy and are good at, and the things you really need to be spending your time on, not just being, not just being active, but being productive. I think that's a really great definition. They are vital if that's the role they're doing. Now, how does it work? How do you talk about a check-in each day, accountability check-in? What else are they doing for you, just as a general rule? What are some of the activities that they're helping with?
They're literally doing everything from sales to operations to, well, let me break it down. I'll break it down as in terms of the flow of an actual business. So they play almost every role in lead gen that I'm not playing. So my role is, as I like to speak on podcasts, I like to speak on stages, and manage the strategy of the company. So as a CEO, that's principally my role. Everything downstream of that. So obviously, let's say someone listens to this podcast, this interview, they want to help. When they come into the to look to understand more about what we do, they start to interact with the VAs overseas, from sales to onboarding to matching up with my team matches them up with their own VAs, to finance, to operations, to HR. That entire business operation I've delegated out to my team, right? So they're integrated into every aspect of the business. There's literally just no aspect of the business that they're not playing critical roles already. That's the same true for any business. Even though we have over 100 so VAs assigned to clients, as a company, we're still running it as a company too. So we have our internal team, and then we have our external team. So again, the roles are across the board.
Well, reading from your website, I've got it pulled up here. You have these 6 areas, kind of 6 divisions, if you will, of work, planning and accountability. These are things like scheduling, calendar management, etc. Marketing and lead gen. This can be social media, it can be outreach, mailbox marketing, etc. Content marketing. This can be social media posting, video editing and publishing. I can't tell you how much time I spend doing that. Article writing and so forth. Sales support and follow-up. I absolutely hate follow-up. It's my least favorite thing to do. If I could never do another follow-up call.
We entrepreneurs, for whatever reason, suck at follow-up, right?
We
I've
do.
met some of the great salespeople. I know this is obviously your background too. They love selling, but they hate follow-up.
It's so true. I don't know why it is. It's the repetitive nature, maybe the rejection, the radio silence, whatever it is. It's just I'd rather slit my wrists, right? So you have sales support, things like follow-up, appointment setting, webinar preparation, things like that. Customer success and customer support. It might be onboarding. It might be outbound or inbound calls, email. And then you talked about general executive assistant services like email management, invoicing, data entry, finding project resources, doing research, and so forth. I know there's much more, but that's a pretty good summary. And it's not just business too. You have VAs that help in their personal life, right? Scheduling. Especially if a little hard to pick up the dry cleaning if they're helping from the Philippines or something. But what are some of the personal things that VAs help with outside of business?
Is often travel. Research, planning dates. I've had clients. Usually they're hired
birthdays, right?
for business purposes, but then they'll say, "Hey, by the way, can you go figure out which restaurant I should blah blah blah," right? So those kind of like add-on tasks. People don't typically hire the VAs not for business. Once they're hired, all of a sudden they start giving them things that can help out in their personal life as well. Right,
I could see that. I assume, because I've never had a VA myself, and I want to talk to you more about this because it's the next stage in our business I would like to take on. It's definitely something I need. So I'm speaking from a little bit of a hypocritical standpoint because I do believe in it and I'm a fan. The more I learn about it, the more I'm intrigued by it, but I have yet to do it. Right. So
yes and no. So here's the key thing. The key word is delegation, right? Then it really is a question of who do you delegate to? As you mentioned, you've got multiple businesses, you've got multiple team members already. So whether we call them VAs, ultimately they're just a team member. They just happen to be overseas. They happen to be lower cost than maybe delegating, say locally. So really, it's a question of resources, budget, and oftentimes we'll have say a team member, they're based in the US, but I often ask people, hey, what are they doing? You've got your team member, are they doing low value work? Because if they are, and you want to make them more efficient, what do they need to delegate so that they can use their skills? So it's not. I don't believe it's being hypocritical. I just think it's as of right now, maybe it's not been the highest priority to bring in, say, a virtual assistant or a vital assistant from Philippines. But as your business grows, as you see different areas of your business need, I could probably bolster this, or improve this area of our business by bringing in some VAs to handle customer support for tickets. Definitely not worth my time doing it. Definitely not worth Frank's time doing it. Frank should be doing this. Kathy should be doing that. Right. Let me bring in this VA team to help them with their busy work.
I love that. I see myself as an entrepreneur going through these transitions, these paradigm shifts, right? From a solopreneur to then working with partners and figuring out how to do that. I gave up 49% of my company to team members. I gave them the opportunity to have ownership in the company. I wanted them to have a vested interest, and that required a transition, right? And then as we continue to grow, we started bringing on affiliates across the country, adding in product lines, and I've had to learn today to delegate. I'm still learning it, but I've started delegating to team members and partners and so forth. But I do see the value of having that accountability buddy, that accountability partner, in a vital assistant to take on more. And one of the things I believe you do for business owners, Beejel, is not just support them, but train them, right? You help them accomplish those paradigm shifts and understand that different ways to do business that maybe they hadn't even considered. As much as we're trying, as much as we're working at it, a lot of the time we just need an outside perspective that's a little bit more experienced in an area and a little bit further away from it.
Yeah, we've taken a different approach with this new business, and we're still at the heart and core, a company that matches entrepreneurs with vital assistance. But we also realize that a lot of entrepreneurs, especially if it's the first time, need that additional support. So, we have a kind of a support program, low cost to match up the low cost of delegation. But the purpose of that is to really keep asking the question, first of all, what are the priorities and what are the goals that you as an entrepreneur, you as a business are working on? To achieve those goals or overcome those challenges, what's the best use of your time to achieve those goals quickly? Mm-hmm. Now, everything else, you want to start to delegate out, right? So what are you not doing that you should be doing to hit those goals? Delegate that out. What are you spending your time on that's preventing you from hitting those goals? Delegate that out, right? So we've taken this approach to this industry.
Well, I love your idea of not just using a VA for yourself, but actually offering it to your team members and maybe even your salespeople. Maybe my top salesperson is great at opening doors, but he could use help in follow-up. And what a great benefit or bonus to them to say, let me help you out with your follow-up, or let me help you out with your email campaign or your social media, and we'll pay for it, right? You're doing a great job. And so it's just, how much more value does that have than just a cash bonus or a steak dinner or something like that? That's giving them that time freedom and that time liberation that Tim Ferriss talks about. This in his book, The 4-Hour Work Week. He talks about this acronym DEAL. He says you have to define what it means to you. What are you looking for? What does freedom mean to you? You have to eliminate those things in your life by delegation and so forth. Sometimes it's just by getting rid of them. You have to automate things in your life, and then you liberate yourself, right? You accomplish that freedom. It's interesting that you said that doesn't necessarily mean you're not working for more than 4 hours, but you're not spending more than 4 hours on those things that you don't love and are good at. And that's a really important designation, because I think a lot of people hear a 4-hour work week and they just blow it off. They think, well, that's not even possible. I'm not even going to waste my time, right? Yeah. Yeah, interesting. So anything else you'd add? We're coming up toward the end of the show. I really have enjoyed having you on here, and I definitely want to continue the conversation. But anything you'd share in closing before we run out of time?
Yeah, for someone listening and they've never done it before, it's the best way is to just step into it. You don't have to hire a VA for a full day, just even for a couple of hours per day. You don't have to assign 20 different things. Assign 1 or 2 things. But like going to gym, step into the space, start to exercise the muscle of delegation, and it becomes very kind of addictive after a while, because then you realize that the more I can get off my plate, the more value I can provide to my business entity.
Right. The more quality of life you are enjoying, it becomes addictive, right? So how do people get a hold of you and learn more about Be Epic Outsourcing? Yeah,
just go, visit our website, beepicoutsourcing.com. Lots of resources there. A short 9-minute video that kind of goes a little bit deeper into who we are, what we do, our pricing. And if we look like a good fit for you, please just contact us. We take a conversational coaching based approach to everything we do.
Fantastic. Free consultation, guys. Remember 2 E's, BEE, just like the bumblebee. I told you before, I'm from Utah. It's a big theme, the deseret, right? You'll see all over Salt Lake City beehives on. You'll see a big long stairway with a beehive on the end of it, right? And just things like that, because those Mormon pioneers, they were productive, they were hardworking, and they loved the model or the metaphor of the bumblebee. So I love that you do that. My business partner Frank Hellering would resonate. He'd love to have you on his show as well, because his show is called The Business Buzz.
Love it.
It's bizbuzz.com, right? So check out beepicoutsourcing.com. Beejel, always a pleasure. Thanks for being on the show today with us. And I think it's a really important piece for someone who's trying to create more certainty in their lives. It can. I'm included in that mix. I definitely want to continue the conversation with you.
Love it. Well, thank you so much for having me on the show.
Thanks for tuning into today's episode of Finding Certainty. We hope you've gained some more insight into how to create more certainty in your own business or nonprofit. Join us next week for another taste of the certainty experience. Until then, we wish you greater certainty in all that you do.